My parents refused to help me because I was independent while spoiling my golden child sister. Now they are demanding I drop everything and take care of my dying mother. My parents gave my sister, Charlotte, everything while telling me I needed to learn independence. When I was 18 and needed help with college tuition, they said, take out loans. It teaches responsibility. When Charlotte turned 18, 2 years later, they paid her full ride to a private university. She's not as strong as you. She needs more support, they explained. When my car broke down and I asked for help fixing it, they said, you're 23. Figure it out yourself. The next week, they bought Charlotte a brand new truck because her old car had a dent in it. She needs reliable transportation, they said, while I took 3 buses to work. When I got married, they gave us a card with $50. When Charlotte got married, they paid for the entire wedding and honeymoon. Her husband comes from a poor family. Someone had to step up, they told me. I'd paid for my own wedding while eating rice and beans for 6 months. When I had my first child and asked Mom to help for a few days, she said she couldn't get time off work. When Charlotte's husband had their baby, Mom retired early to be their full-time nanny. They're struggling, she explained. They weren't struggling. Charlotte made more than me but spent it on toys and trips while my parents covered her bills. When my wife lost her job, and we asked for a small loan to keep our apartment, my dad said, you need to learn to save better. We can't always bail you out. We'd never asked for anything before. Meanwhile, Charlotte was living in a house my parents bought for her, driving cars they paid for, eating groceries they delivered weekly. She's just not good with money, Mom would say. If we don't help her, who will? Every holiday, Charlotte would get expensive gifts while I got lectures about being more grateful. Every achievement I had was met with, that's nice. While Charlotte's participation trophies got framed and displayed. When I graduated nursing school while working full-time and raising 2 kids, they didn't come to the ceremony. When Charlotte completed an online certificate in marketing, they threw her a party. This went on for 15 years. 15 years of watching them pay Charlotte's rent while I worked 3 jobs. 15 years of being told I was strong enough to handle things alone while Charlotte needed support. 15 years of begging for scraps while Charlotte got served everything on silver platters. Then Mom got sick. Really sick. Needed round-the-clock care. Sick. Dad called me crying. We need you to move back home. Someone has to take care of Mom. I can't do it alone. I asked about Charlotte. Oh, she's too busy with her job, and she doesn't have medical training like you do. Charlotte's job was part-time at a gym. She spent most of her day playing video games in the house my parents bought her. But suddenly, I was needed. Suddenly, my strength and independence were useful. I told them I'd help, but I needed to know something first. Ask them to show me Mom's will. Dad got defensive. Why does that matter right now? But I insisted. The will left everything to Charlotte. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, everything. The reason was written right there, our daughter has proven she can take care of herself. Our daughter needs continuous support. They expected me to give up my job, move my family, and become Mom's unpaid nurse while knowing they'd left me nothing, while Charlotte would inherit everything I'd helped maintain. It's different, Dad tried to explain. You're successful. You don't need our money. I laughed. I'm successful because you forced me to be. Because you gave me no choice. Because every time I needed help, you told me to figure it out myself. Mom tried to speak from her bed. You were always the capable one. Charlotte needed us more. No, I said, Charlotte wanted more, and you gave it to her. I needed you just as much, but you decided I was too strong to deserve help. I left that day. Told them to call Charlotte. Told them to use all that money they'd saved by never helping me to hire a nurse. Mom called, crying, 2 days later. Mom's number lit up my phone screen again. I watched it buzz against the kitchen counter, the vibration making it inch toward the edge. My wife stood at the stove stirring pasta sauce, glancing over at me every few seconds. The phone went silent, then immediately started buzzing again. I reached over and declined the call. My hands were shaking as I pulled them back to my lap. She called again. I declined. Again. Another message popped through. By the time dinner was ready, the calls had stopped. I helped my wife set the table while my phone sat silent on the counter. We sat down to eat, and I was just starting to relax when the phone buzzed once, then twice. Then it started going off like crazy with text message notifications. I grabbed it, seeing dozens of messages flooding in from Mom. The first few were crying emojis and pleas to just talk to her. Then they shifted to longer paragraphs about family obligation and how she raised me better than this. I scrolled through message after message, each one getting nastier. One said I was abandoning my dying mother. Another called me selfish and cruel. There was a long one about how she sacrificed everything for me. And this was how I repaid her. I opened my phone screenshot function and started capturing every single message. I'd learned years ago to document everything when it came to my parents. Every text, every voicemail, every email got saved. My wife asked what I was doing, and I told her I was making sure I had proof of all this. She read the messages over my shoulder. I watched her face change as she scrolled through them. Her jaw clenched tighter with each message. She handed me back the phone when she finished. "You know," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm proud of you for standing up to them." I started crying harder than I had when Mom left those guilt-trip voicemails. But these tears felt different. They felt like relief mixed with years of hurt finally being acknowledged. Later that evening, I called both kids into the living room. My 10-year-old sat on the couch next to my 8-year-old. They both looked worried. I sat down across from them and took a deep breath. I explained that Grandma was very sick and needed a lot of help. I told them in simple terms that sometimes when people are sick, they need someone to take care of them all day and night. My 10-year-old asked if we were going to help take care of Grandma. I told her that Mommy couldn't help right now. She asked why not. I explained that it was complicated, but that Grandma had other family who could help her. My 8-year-old stayed quiet, but my 10-year-old frowned. She asked why Aunt Charlotte couldn't take care of Grandma. The question hit me like a punch to the chest. I realized my own children had noticed the unfair treatment. They'd seen how their grandparents treated their aunt differently than they treated me. I told her that was a very good question and that Aunt Charlotte should be helping. She nodded like that made sense to her. My phone rang at 9 that night. I looked at the screen and saw Charlotte's name. I hadn't heard from my sister in 6 months. I answered and immediately heard panic in her voice. She demanded to know why I was abandoning the family. I asked her where she'd been for the past 15 years while I was supposedly so independent and capable. She went quiet for a second. Then she started talking over me, her voice getting louder. I interrupted her and asked if she remembered when my car broke down and I had to take 3 buses to work. I asked if she remembered getting a brand new truck a week later. She told me that was different. I asked how it was different. She didn't have an answer. Charlotte's voice changed, getting shakier. She stammered that this situation was different now. She said Mom was dying. She said I had medical training and she didn't know what to do. I let her finish her whole speech. Then I told her she could learn the same way I learned everything else in my life. I said she could figure it out completely alone without any family support. She tried to interrupt, but I kept talking. I reminded her about every time I needed help and got told to handle it myself. I brought up my wedding that I paid for while eating rice and beans for 6 months. I mentioned my first baby when Mom couldn't get time off work. She went quiet again. Then she said I was being cruel. She tried a different approach. Her voice got softer and she said Mom was falling apart. She said she couldn't handle the physical demands of taking care of Dad. She said I was the only one who could help because I was a nurse. I reminded her that Mom retired early to be her full-time nanny. I told her Mom couldn't get time off work when I had my first baby, but she could quit her job entirely for her. I asked her if she remembered that. She said that was years ago and didn't matter now. I told her it mattered to me. It had always mattered. She said I was being bitter and holding on to old grudges. I told her those old grudges were my entire life experience with our parents. She called me heartless. Then she hung up. I sat staring at my phone for a minute. Then I realized I felt better. The conversation had confirmed I was doing the right thing. The next morning, my husband came into the room and asked how it went. I told him Charlotte called me heartless. He shook his head and went to the kitchen. He came back with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He poured us each a glass and held his up. He said we were toasting to me, putting myself first for once. I clinked my glass against his, and we both drank. The wine tasted better than it should have. The next day, while I was making coffee, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. A woman's voice introduced herself as a hospital social worker named Leah. She said she was calling to discuss home care options for my father. I felt my stomach tighten. Leah explained that my mother had given her my number as the family member with medical expertise. She started listing care requirements and asking about my availability to help coordinate services. I interrupted and told her there was a mistake. I explained I wasn't involved in my father's care. Leah sounded confused. She said my mother had been very clear that I was a nurse and would be helping manage the home care situation. I told her my mother was incorrect and that she needed to work directly with my parents for any care planning. Leah asked if there was family conflict she should be aware of. I kept my voice steady and said my parents had other family members who could help them and that I wouldn't be participating. She thanked me and said she'd follow up with my mother to clarify. I hung up and immediately texted my mother. I told her to stop giving out my contact information, and that if she did it again, I'd file a formal complaint with the hospital. She didn't respond. 2 days later, my phone buzzed during my lunch break at work. A voicemail notification appeared. I waited until I got to my car to listen. Mom's voice came through, shaky and angry. She said, Dad was admitted to the hospital with pneumonia. She said his condition had gotten worse because she was too stressed to properly care for him. Her voice rose as she said the stress was my fault for abandoning the family when they needed me most. She said I was killing my own father by being selfish and cruel. She said I hoped I could live with myself when he died alone. The message ended abruptly. I sat in my car, staring at my phone. My hands weren't shaking. I felt oddly calm. I saved the voicemail and made a note of the date and time. Then I forwarded it to myself in 3 different ways to make sure I had copies. My therapy appointment was the next morning. I brought my phone and played him the voicemail without any introduction. He listened with his usual calm expression. When it ended, he asked how I felt hearing it. I told him I felt relieved to have proof of what I'd been dealing with my whole life. Tanner nodded and said the voicemail was a clear example of emotional manipulation and abuse. He pointed out that blaming me for Dad's pneumonia was absurd. He said my mother was trying to make me responsible for the consequences of her own choices. We spent the rest of the session talking about what kind of relationship I wanted with my parents going forward. Tanner asked if I could imagine a healthy relationship with them. I said I honestly didn't know. He told me that was okay and that I didn't have to decide right now. He said the important thing was recognizing I had choices, and that whatever I decided would be valid. That evening, I was making dinner when a Facebook message notification popped up on my phone. The name surprised me. Charlotte's wife. We had barely spoken in years beyond polite hellos at family gatherings. I opened the message while stirring pasta sauce. She said she knew things were complicated right now, but she needed to tell me something important. She said it was about Charlotte and my parents' relationship. She said there were things I didn't know that might help me understand the situation better. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I stared at the message for a long time. My husband came into the kitchen and asked what was wrong. I showed him the message. He raised his eyebrows and asked if I thought it was a trap. I said I didn't know, but I was curious. I messaged back and agreed to meet her the next afternoon. The coffee shop was halfway between our houses. I arrived first and chose a table near the back. Charlotte's wife walked in 10 minutes later, looking tired. She had dark circles under her eyes and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She ordered a large coffee and sat down across from me. We made awkward small talk for a minute. Then she took a deep breath and started talking. She said Charlotte had been having panic attacks ever since Dad got sick. She said she'd wake up in the middle of the night hyperventilating and crying. She said she kept saying she didn't know what to do. Charlotte's wife's voice got quieter as she explained that Charlotte genuinely had no idea how to handle real responsibility. She said my parents' constant enabling had left her completely unprepared for adult life. She said she'd been covering for her for years. She said she handled all their bills, scheduled all their appointments, made all their major decisions. She said she was exhausted from basically being her mother. She looked at me with red eyes and said she couldn't do it anymore. Charlotte's wife kept talking. She said something that surprised me. She admitted she'd resented me for years. She said my parents constantly compared her to me. She said every time she couldn't get Charlotte to handle something, my mother would bring up how I managed everything alone. She said my father would shake his head and wonder why she couldn't be more independent like me. She said it made her feel like a failure, but she was starting to realize the favoritism had hurt both of us in different ways. She said my parents had set impossible standards by holding me up as someone who never needed help while simultaneously making sure Charlotte never had to try. She said it was messed up and unfair to everyone involved. I listened without interrupting. I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I felt sorry for Charlotte. Not enough to change my boundaries, but sorry in a way I hadn't expected. I understood that being given everything had actually robbed her of something important. She never got the chance to develop real skills or self-respect. She never learned that she could handle hard things because nobody ever let her try. My parents had damaged her just as much as they had damaged me, but in the opposite way. But I also recognized something clearly. Her failure to grow up wasn't my responsibility to fix. Her panic attacks and helplessness weren't my problem to solve. I'd spent 15 years being forced to be strong. She'd spent 15 years being allowed to be weak. Neither of us got what we actually needed. I told Charlotte's wife I understood what she was saying and that I was sorry she'd been caught in the middle. She nodded and wiped her eyes. Charlotte's wife asked me a direct question. She wanted to know if I had any advice for dealing with my parents' demands. She said they'd been calling her constantly asking her to convince Charlotte to step up. She said they kept guilting her about family obligation. I looked at her and told her the same thing I'd finally learned. I said the word no is a complete sentence. I said she didn't need to explain or justify or defend her boundaries. She just needed to state them and hold firm. Charlotte's wife looked scared, but also hopeful. She said she'd never thought about it that way. She said she always felt like she needed a good enough reason to refuse. I told her that protecting her own well-being was reason enough. She nodded slowly, like maybe she'd been waiting for someone to give her permission to set boundaries. A week later, I got another call from Charlotte's wife. She sounded much more confident this time. She said she had started setting boundaries with Charlotte, and although it was difficult, she could already see changes. Charlotte was starting to understand that she couldn't rely on others to solve all her problems anymore. My heart lifted a little hearing that. It felt like a small victory not just for me but for her too. A month passed, and my life was quieter than I expected. Mom and I continued therapy together, slowly rebuilding a relationship based on honesty. I was still cautious but felt a sense of control over my own life that I hadn't had in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Charlotte was still learning and growing, and the boundaries I had set were holding strong. Then, one day, my phone rang. It was from a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't pick up. But something told me to answer. It was the estate lawyer. He was calling to tell me that my father had updated his will before he passed. I froze when he explained that everything would now be split evenly between Charlotte and me. He read the new language of the will, acknowledging the past mistakes made regarding my independence, and that the old reasoning had been wrong. I didn't know how to feel at first. Was I supposed to be happy about the inheritance? My parents' acknowledgement of their wrongdoings had been hard-won, and the money was a side note to all of the emotional labor. I thanked him for the information but told him that my priority was not the money. It was the healing I was now working on with my family. I sat down with my husband that evening. I told him what the lawyer had said, and we both took a moment to process the news. My husband, who had been my rock through all of this, held my hand and said, "I'm proud of you. This is what you've been fighting for. Not the money, but the respect." I nodded and smiled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I had worked so hard to become who I am today, strong, independent, but also capable of healing the parts of me that needed it. A few weeks later, I received a text from Charlotte's wife. It was long, detailed, and full of raw emotion. She thanked me for showing her the strength to set boundaries with Charlotte and explained that, after months of therapy, Charlotte had started to recognize the damage my parents' behavior had caused. She said Charlotte had been working hard to grow, and it felt like she was finally becoming the adult my parents had always expected me to be. I was surprised. In some ways, it felt like everything was starting to make sense. Charlotte's journey wasn't just about understanding her privilege, it was about learning what it meant to be an adult. To take responsibility for her actions and not rely on others to fix everything. As the months went on, things started to change. Charlotte and I didn't speak as often, but when we did, it was different. We spoke as adults, not siblings competing for our parents' affection. My relationship with my mom was slowly mending, and while it would never be perfect, it felt healthier. My mom continued her therapy sessions, and while it was painful for both of us, I saw her making real efforts to understand me. As for Charlotte, it took time, but I noticed her putting in the work. She was trying, and that was enough for now. I knew it would take time for her to fully recognize the damage my parents had done, but I had learned that some wounds take years to heal. One day, while I was at work, I received a text from Charlotte. She said, "I want to apologize for everything. For never seeing the sacrifices you made. For not being there when you needed me. For never recognizing the weight of what was happening. I see now. I'm sorry." I didn't know how to respond at first. I felt a rush of emotions, but mostly relief. It wasn't the apology I had been waiting for, but it was an acknowledgement of her journey. It was something. And that was enough for me. A few months after that, I received a call from Charlotte. This time, it was to ask if I wanted to join her and her family for dinner. She and her wife had moved into a new place, and they wanted to have a small get-together. I thought about it for a moment before agreeing. It felt like a big step, one that might hurt, but also one that could bring closure. The evening arrived, and as I walked into her home, I felt something shift. Charlotte was there, but this time, she wasn't the person who needed everything fixed for her. She was someone who had worked hard to improve, and she was genuinely happy to see me. Her wife was warm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was sitting at a table with family, not a competition, but just people trying to get by. After dinner, as we sat talking, I felt peace settle in. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't sure where my relationship with my parents would go, but I knew I had the strength to walk away when necessary. I had fought for myself, for my boundaries, and in the end, I was the one who needed to change the course of my life. In the years that followed, things continued to improve. My parents were never perfect, and neither was Charlotte. But we were all learning, growing, and forgiving. The inheritance that once seemed like the final piece of a painful puzzle wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was the healing. The respect. The understanding that we were all just people, imperfect, but trying. I kept my boundaries, and I never allowed anyone, including my parents, to make me feel like I didn't deserve love, fairness, or respect. My children grew up learning that family isn't about giving everything up for others, it's about love, respect, and holding firm to what you deserve. And in the end, I knew I had done the right thing. The real reward wasn't in the inheritance or the apologies. It was in knowing that, no matter what happened, I had chosen myself, and that was the most powerful choice I could have made. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.